Hi, sixth graders. This video is on ratios, so label the top of your page accordingly, and I apologize in advance for the length of this video because there is a lot of specific information that we have to learn about for ratios and rates. So looking at these three sets of comparisons right here, we want to ask ourselves, what do they all have in common and how can we describe their relationship? Well, if we look here, we can see that there's 3 diamonds to 5 hearts. Here we have 3 red tiles to 4 blue tiles, and here we have 5 girls to 15 boys. So it's all comparing one thing to another. If we look here, this means that for every 3 red tiles we have 4 blue tiles. So if I have 6 red tiles, I would have 8 blue tiles. So for every 3 red, we have 4 blue. So this is a vocab word that I want you to write down. A ratio is a comparison of 2 quantities by division. And then I also want you to write down the 3 different ways that we can write ratios, which is going to be right here. If we're, again, comparing the 3 to 4, one way to write it, so you could just write 3 ways to write ratios with a line under it. One way is using the word to, and we would say 3 to 4. If I have the 3 with a colon 4, that still would be 3 to 4. And then I could use a fraction bar, and this would also be read 3 to 4. All meaning 3 of one thing to 4 of another. So when we look at comparing things and writing ratios, we first of all have to remember that the order of the numbers in the ratio is important. So this is something you probably want to write down and circle. What is the ratio of rectangles to total shapes? So we look at what we have that we're comparing. The first number is the first thing that we're comparing. So I count how many rectangles, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So I could write it as 6. And then to total shapes, so I know there's 6 rectangles with 2 more stars, so that would be 6 to 8. Or we could write it 6 to 8 or 6 to 8. And then we write it in simplest form. I know that they both can be divided by 2. So then it would be the same as 3 to 4. So for every 6 rectangles, there are 8 total shapes, which is the same as for every 3 rectangles, there are 4 total shapes. What is the ratio of total shapes to triangles? So total shapes is going to come first this time. 1, 2, 3, 4 is going to be on the top. To triangles is going to be 2. So 4 to 2. 4 to 2 or 4 to 2. 3 different ways for us to write it. And then we simplify. They can both be divided by 2. So I divide 4 by 2 when I get 2. 2 by 2 is 1. So 4 to 2 is the same as 2 to 1. So for every 2 shapes, 1 is going to be a triangle, which makes sense because half of the total shapes are triangles. At the store, the ratio of books sold to movies sold was 8 to 2. So this means that for every 8 books sold, there were 2 movies sold because books comes first, 8 comes first, movies come second, 2 comes second, and then for every 2 movies sold, there were 8 books sold. So in order to set up a ratio, you need to know what numbers are being compared and then set it up in fraction form. This would be helpful to write down. First item listed is the numerator, second item listed is the denominator, and then you simplify. Although, remember I said you're going to simplify and you're always going to change improper fractions to mixed numbers. When you're writing it as a ratio and you're comparing, we actually want to leave it as an improper fraction, and we'll talk about that when we have one and see the importance of it. So Jane has a bag that contains 3 bouncy balls, 4 marbles, 7 books, and 1 orange. What is the ratio of books to marbles? So we have 7 books to 4 marbles, so the ratio would be 7 to 4. What is the ratio of marbles to books? So marbles comes first, and then books, so 4 to 7. What is the ratio of bouncy balls to marbles? So bouncy balls is 3, to marbles is 4, so then it'd be 3 to 4. And then what is the ratio of bouncy balls to total items in the bag? So bouncy balls is 3, Total items, we have 3 plus 4 is 7, plus 7 is 14, plus 1 is 15. So 3 bouncy balls to 15 items in the bag, and we can simplify that by dividing them both by 3. So that means for every 1 bouncy ball, there's 5 items in the bag. These ones I didn't simplify because they're already in simplest form. There was not a number that they could both be divided by. All right, I want you to look at the table below and then answer the next 4 questions on your own. So pause the video and then come back and check your work. All right, so to speed up time on the video just a little bit, I put in the answers, so check your work and then make sure that you put it into simplest form. So adults to students, and make sure you have it the correct order as well. So adults to students, there's 24 adults, 180 students, and then we simplify it, which means that for every 2 adults, there are 15 students. Students to buses, 180 students to 4 buses. Notice how I wrote my ratio to match how it was worded in the question for me. So I'm using the colon because that's how it was worded before. So 180 to 4 would be simplified to be 45 to 1, which tells me that there's 45 students per bus. And notice that we don't leave it, we leave it like this. We don't change it any further. We don't make it a whole number. We leave it so that we can see the 2 things that we're comparing. Buses to people, so 4 to 204 because we add the students and the adults. So this says that for every bus there's actually 51 people because we have the adults on there as well. And then adults to people, so 24 adults, and then I add the adults with the students to 204. They can both be divided by 12, so we would have 2 adults for every 17 people. All right, writing ratios as fractions and percents. This would be a great example to write down. So write the problem down and then write the questions and the answers. If you have 5 cups of trail mix, it has 2 cups of raisins. What is the ratio of raisins to trail mix? So this is saying that if I take 5 cups of trail mix, 2 cups of that 5 cups will have raisins in it. So written as a fraction in simplest form. So it's saying raisins first, then trail mix second. So that means 2 is going to go on the top because raisins is first right here over 5. So for every 2 cups of raisins, there's 5 cups of trail mix. It's already in simplest form, so I leave it like that. Written as a percent. So we know that we can change it to hundredths, and then that's how we can write it as a percent. But now that we're using calculators, and if you have your calculator nearby or you can use your iPad, I would like you to practice doing this on your calculator. So what you're going to do is you're going to divide the numerator by the denominator. So I'm in my calculator, I'm going to put 2 divided by 5, and you should get 0.4. Then we round to the nearest hundredth, which is already to tenths, so we don't need to round anymore. And then we move the decimal 2.2 places to the right. So we go like that, add a 0 because there's nothing there. So then it would be 40%. So what does this percent mean based on the situation? It means that for 5 cups, every 5 cups of trail mix, 40% of that will be raisins. If I doubled, if I took 10 cups of trail mix, then 4 cups of that would be raisins, which would still be 40% of the trail mix that would be raisins. We're going to skip this problem and go to the next slide. You pause the video and try these 2 problems on your own and then come back and check. All right, the first problem, on Saturday, Trey shoveled for 5 hours and played video games for 3 hours. What is Trey's ratio of playing video games to shoveling? Video games was 3. Shoveling was 5, so the fraction would be 3 to 5, or 3 over 5. And then written as a percent, in my calculator, I can do 3 divided by 5, and I get 0.6, which would be 60%, because I need to go over 2. So that means that 60% of the amount of time Trey shoveled is what he did playing video games. And then currently Mr. Beast has 49 million subscribers on YouTube, and PewDiePie has 107 million, which, by the way, I made up this problem last year. So the number of subscribers maybe have changed, if you're wondering. What is the ratio of Mr. Beast's subscribers to PewDiePie's? And we'll drop the million. So the fraction would be 49 to 107, or 49 over 107. And then I write that as a percent, 49 divided by 107. I rounded it to the hundredths, which is 46 hundredths, which is 46%. So Mr. Beast has 46% of the amount of subscribers that PewDiePie has. Another vocab word that I would like you to write down is equivalent ratios, which are ratios that have the same value. Equivalent being equal, so equal ratios. Last weekend, Mrs. Kroska drove 250 miles in 4 hours, and Mrs. Little drove 500 miles in 8 hours. Are these ratios equivalent? If not, who had a higher ratio of driving? You can just watch me do this one, and then you can write down the next example in your notebook, or you could write down both. So Mrs. Kroska is 250 miles to 4 hours. That's her ratio. Mrs. Little is 500 miles to 8 hours. If I look at these as fractions and I get them to the same common denominator, then I'm able to compare the top. So I know that 4 can go into 8, so I'm just going to multiply these by 2. And I'm going to see that if Mrs. Kroska drove 8 hours, how many miles would she go if they would be the same? And as you can see, 250 times 2 is 500. 4 times 2 is 8. So therefore, they are equal. Mr. Hansen's cookie recipe calls for 2 cups flour to 8 cups sugar. Mr. Schaefer's recipe calls for 8 cups flour to 14 cups sugar. That's a lot of sugar. Are these ratios equivalent? If not, who had a higher ratio of flour to sugar? So for Mr. Hansen, he has 2 cups flour to 8 cups sugar. Mr. Schaefer has 8 cups flour to 14 cups sugar. So I asked myself, what's a number that 8 and 14 can both go into? I know they both can go into 56. So I'm going to go times 7 times 7. And then 14 times 4 is 56. So then times 4. So let's rewrite this. If Mr. Hansen put in 14 cups of flour, he would need to put in 56 cups of sugar. And if Mr. Schaefer put in 32 cups of flour, he would have to put in 56 cups of sugar. So now we have the same denominator, and it's easier for us to compare our numerators, which is flour. And I can see that they are not equal because Mr. Hansen, if they both put in 56 cups of sugar, Mr. Hansen would only put in 14 cups of flour and Mr. Schaefer would put in 32 cups of flour. And then who had a higher ratio of flour to sugar? It would be Mr. Schaefer because he has a lot more flour that goes along with the sugar. I'm going to have you pause the video once again and try these 2 problems that you can practice finding equivalent ratios on, and then come back and check your work. Okay, so Morning Glory's Bakery sells 4 muffins for every 10 scones, which I lined up right here, and then Caribou Coffee sells 2 muffins for every 6 scones, which I lined up right here. I can see that we have 6 and 10 in our denominators. They both go into 30. So I multiplied this both by 3, this both by 5, and I got 12 muffins for every 30 scones at Morning Glory's and 10 muffins for every 30 scones at Caribou Coffee. So we know that they are not equal, and we can see that Morning Glory's has a higher ratio because for the same amount of scones at Morning Glory's and Caribou, you can get more muffins at Morning Glory's. For this problem, select 2 ratios that are equivalent to 6 to 10. So I started doing just a little bit of pre-work. So if I look at 20 to 12, I can see that if I multiply 12 by 5, I would get 60. And then if I multiply 10 by 6, I get 60. So basically what I'm doing is I'm getting a common denominator, or I'm getting a common second part of my ratio. And then whatever I do to one side, I have to do to the other side. So I changed this to 100 to 60. And then 6 to 10 would be the same as 36 to 60. And we can see that they are not equal when we compare with the same second part of the ratio. 32 to 50, well, I know I can just take 6 to 10 and I can change it to 50 in my second part. So I multiplied both by 5 and I got 30 to 50. 32 and 30 are not equal, so therefore the ratio is not equal. 3 to 5, I know if I just multiply 5 times 2, I would get 10. So that's all I had to do, and when I multiply them both by 2, I actually do get 6 to 10. So then this one is equal. 24 divided by 40, well, I know that if I divide them both by 4, I would get 6 to 10. So those would be equal as well. And then 14 to 80, I can just take 6 to 10, my original ratio, multiply it times 8 so that I get 80 in my second part. If they both have 80 but different parts of the first ratio, or different of the first part of the ratio, sorry, I worded that weird. We have 14 and we have 48, so therefore they are not equal. We're going to skip this problem and do this in class tomorrow. And then that's all I have. So make sure you go back, rewatch any parts that are confusing, have your notes with you the next time you're in class, and have a great day.